If you have ever tried getting a hold of a family member in an emergency and had that call failed signal come up on your phone, you know how stressful it can be to not be able to communicate when you want to. And one of the things that we don't talk about probably enough in prepping is your emergency communication plan. How are you going to stay in touch with the people that you care about? Hey friends, welcome back to Preparedness. If you are new here, I am Laura. We talk all things prepping and self-sufficiency, and I'm really glad you're here today because today we're going to talk about 5 ways to stay in touch during emergency situations that maybe you haven't thought of, or maybe you have but just haven't actually taken action on. And what we want to do is make sure that you have the ability to stay in touch with the people that are important to you. So let's jump in. All right, step 1 is simply have a family communication plan. I don't know about you, but my life revolves around my iPhone these days, and everybody I know just has a number programmed into my phone. And when I want to get in touch with them, I just hit a button and I magically get in touch with them. But if the power was out and my cell phone died, I have to admit that I would not know the numbers of all of the people that I would want to stay in touch with. So the first part of having a communication plan is simply making sure that you have the numbers available to you of the people that you want to get in touch with in emergency and emergency response numbers. On our family communication plan, we have a list of the local fire department, the police department, those local numbers that maybe normally you would just Google, but if there is a power outage or an emergency situation, you may not be able to just go to your handy Google machine and find those. So you want to have those written down in a place where everybody can locate them. In that family communication plan, you are also going to want to list the way people can expect to get in touch with you. So is there a family member out of town that you're all going to call to check in with? When we have localized emergencies, it's sometimes easy to forget that we may be affected, but the people outside of our local area may be able to get calls like normal. So it's always a great idea to have a family member or a trusted friend outside of your local area who people could call to let them know what's going on. So that way, if you can get a call through to an outside person, everybody can check in with them, and then they can kind of keep up with what is going on, who is where, etc. That is a great solution if your cell phones are not working, if you can't get those normal calls through. You're also going to make sure that you write this plan down on paper. I know that sounds so old-fashioned, but we have gotten really reliant on all of our digital technology. Again, I know I have, and I am always remembering that I don't have everybody's numbers memorized like I used to when I was a kid, when I could go to the phone on the wall and pick it up and dial and remember everybody's number by heart. Now I just press a button and their number pops up. So making sure that you have those things written down is going to be absolutely essential. The second thing to think about is how to get through messages without a phone. So think about messaging apps. This could be something like Facebook Messenger, it could be WhatsApp, it could be Signal. I will tell you, Signal is the app of choice for our family, just based on some security concerns and some things that we've been hearing in the news. And so highly recommend, if you are going to trade information, especially if it's sensitive in nature, you're going to want to have a secure app that you can use. The beauty of these apps is that they work off a Wi-Fi signal or cellular data, even if sometimes cellular phone calls can't go through. You also probably have noticed that sometimes you can send text messages, either SMS messages or iMessages if you're on an iPhone, as long as you have an internet connection. In a total grid down, power out type scenario, you may also not have access to the internet, and so you are going to have to rely on that cellular tower data to get those messages through. But having a app already pre-downloaded on your phone in a place that everyone goes to share messages can be super comforting in an emergency situation where you can still get information through even if it's not by voice. In some of these messaging apps, you can actually preload messages in, so you can have some things already pre-programmed that your kids can just hit a button that says, hey, I'm safe, I'm at a power outage, and this is where I'm at. Like things that will make it easy for them to respond to an emergency situation. Again, anything you can do to simplify things and make it less stressful during an emergency is going to be incredibly important. It's really important to run drills with these messaging apps because, again, there's a little bit of a learning curve sometimes, especially if you have younger kids. And so you're going to want to practice kind of exchanging messages on these things anyway. It's a great option if you don't need an immediate response, if you're just trying to share information. Again, you can also share pictures, things like that. So it's just another option besides just using a text messaging chain that maybe you're already used to. I don't know about you, but I hate group text messages. but I will say that they have a place and a purpose for emergency use. And so having all of those numbers preloaded into a group where you could hit a button and send a message to all of the people who are on that emergency contact list that you hopefully already made in step one, then you can make sure that you are relaying information. The beauty of these messaging apps is that they work frequently without power. And so again, as long as you have Wi-Fi or a cell phone signal, you should still be able to use your phones for that purpose. Also, if your computer is still charged, you can send messages on your computer for a lot of those apps. Chances are you already probably have a communication plan. You're probably already using messaging and or texting for emergency situations. And so you're probably more familiar with that. As we move into some more of these advanced communication strategies, we're going to get into things that maybe you haven't thought of before. But if this video is helpful and you thought of that person that you would love to stay in touch with, do me a favor, share this video with them so they know how to stay in touch with you during an emergency situation. All right, let's jump to number 3. Number 3 is just using Walkie Talkies, or FRS, which stands for Family Radio Service. These Family Radio Service Walkie Talkies are great for up to usually a mile, maybe half a mile, depending on your terrain. The reason that I like these are really twofold. The first is to use them to communicate with people in your local area. So think about neighbors that you may want to stay in touch with. If you have family members that live hopefully close by, you may be able to stay in touch with them. Again, here on our family property, we'd be able to reach out to my in-laws and stay in touch with them with a walkie-talkie if for some reason we couldn't just walk down the hill and get to them. So walkie-talkies can be great for short kind of distances to stay in touch with the people that are important. Again, this is great for neighborhoods. It's great for neighborhood watches. If you are in kind of a situation where you're worried about security in an area, this is a great way to be able to pass information to each other. And all you need to do is agree on a channel to set this to, and then you and your family know what channel to go to. As you're writing that communication plan in step 1, you may also want to remind people what channel to tune into on these walkie-talkies. The second reason I love walkie-talkies is just for what I'll call convoying or traveling. If you've ever traveled with someone in your family in another vehicle, you know that sometimes you have to send messages or give them a quick phone call to say, hey, I want to pull off, I want to get gas, I want to stop, whatever the conversation may be. But if for some reason your cell phones aren't working, that may not be a possibility. And so having the ability to just send a message with a walkie-talkie is super useful. My husband and I actually really enjoy using these just for traveling because we can stay in touch without having to necessarily always make a phone call, always send a text message or something like that. So another great reason to have these walkie-talkies. They're relatively inexpensive. You can buy a couple packs off of Amazon. You can save them and you can then distribute them to neighbors or friends if you have them in the local area that you want to be able to stay in touch with during an emergency situation. It's a great thing to have on hand for that community communication thing that you may want to have in place if for some reason phones aren't working, or if you just want to have kind of a closed loop system that you can talk on. One thing to note about walkie-talkies is anybody that's tuned into the channel that you're on will be able to hear your communication if that's something you're worried about from a security perspective. You're just going to want to come up with words or code words or things like that that may then allow you to have those conversations that you don't want to just be airing over the open air to anybody who might be tuned in. If you've ever turned one of these on, you'll know that if you are in a larger city or in a town, that sometimes you pick up all sorts of conversations. We also use these on our RV trips, and it's amazing what you hear sometimes in RV parks on these. So just be mindful that anything that you say on these is kind of just open air and anybody else can hear that. A fun fact about walkie-talkies is that in 2010, during the Haiti earthquake kind of cleanup situation, aid workers relied exclusively on walkie-talkies to communicate with each other. So again, they had no power, they had no phones, kind of the cell networks weren't working, and walkie-talkies really became that emergency communication thing. And that leads us very closely into number 4, which is ham radios. If you are looking for communication equipment that allows you to talk completely off grid, then ham radio is the direction you're going to want to go. My husband and I decided a few years ago to go ahead and get certified to use ham radios. You do need to take a test. You do need to be licensed to use these legally. And so you're going to want to get online and just search for a local ham radio testing station in your local area. You're going to get an opportunity to kind of study up and take a test. And then once you're certified, you can use ham radios. There's different levels of certification. We have the most basic certification, which allows us to use these ham radios kind of in a local area off repeater stations that we have here. You will also find that when you get into this, there are a lot of ham radio clubs that will help you learn how to use the radios. They'll help you learn how to talk on them. They'll help you learn how to communicate with them. And something interesting to note is that a lot of community emergency response teams use ham radio almost exclusively exclusively to communicate during emergency situations. This is a frequency that is normally used and things are not going quite right when communication channels are full. It is a great way for emergency responders to be able to communicate in those kinds of emergency scenarios. You can start off with a very simple handheld ham radio, which is what we have here. They're called Baofangs. They are a cheap, inexpensive radio that you can use, but for most of us, they will work pretty well for the kind of emergency communications that we want. There are tons of pieces of equipment out there that are much nicer, that can transmit at a much longer range, assuming that you are certified to do that. And then you can upgrade your equipment as you go. But these handheld ones are really nice for emergencies in terms of keeping them in your emergency packs, keeping them in your vehicles. So my husband and I both keep a ham radio in our car if we were ever stuck or stranded somewhere. We have the local repeater channels stored in here. So in theory, we could make a phone call to each other or a ham radio call to each other and at least let each other know what was going on. So if you're looking for an ultimate comm backup, then I would highly recommend ham radio certification as a good option. And then the fifth and final one, which I will say historically has been a little bit, I'll just say expensive or maybe kind of a distant plan for emergency communication, is just satellite communication. So any kind of phone or gadget that uses satellites to communicate versus a radio tower or something like that, like a local landline. Satellite phones are really great if you are somewhere where you don't have a signal all of the time, because you can use them to communicate for emergencies. A lot of hikers use emergency satellite beacons and radios for this thing. If you've ever heard of Garmin, there are Garmin radios called Garmin InReach, and there's a few others that allow you to send emergency text messages over a satellite link. And then the reason those are great is because even if you don't have cell phone coverage or regular telephone coverage, those messages will still go through. Satellite phones are pretty expensive. They run around $1,000. Most plans run around $100 a month for 150-ish minutes or 100 minutes, depending on the plan. So again, not necessarily something you're going to want to just rush out and buy. But if you are already using satellite communication for hiking or camping, that is also a great option for you for satellite communication. And a bonus tip that I will say is brand new: if you have an iPhone 14 or later, Apple is now allowing you to send satellite messages on your cell phone if you don't have a signal. I found out about this completely by accident because, again, I live out in the middle of nowhere in the country, and I was trying to send a text message one day and realized I wasn't in coverage, and it said, "Would you like to send this as a satellite message?" And I had no idea what it was talking about. I didn't immediately hit send, but I did come home and research, and Apple has released the ability to send satellite messages to other iPhones and other cell phones in general on a satellite. You have to have a clear view of the sky, and it will show you how to basically sync to a satellite. A little picture will kind of come in. You turn your phone until you have a good lock. It will tell you when the signal is connected, and then you can actually send messages via your iPhone just regularly with a satellite message. Now, I have not tried this in an emergency situation. I would assume that will still work because satellites are not always impacted by emergencies that we have here on the ground. And so those satellite links should still be able to allow you to get a message across. So if you have an iPhone, that may be something worth researching. Currently, Apple is not charging for this. Now, I would expect that over time, this will become a paid feature and that will be part of your subscription. But as of right now, you can send satellite messages for free on any iPhone 14 or later. So if you have an iPhone, that may be another emergency communication option for you. So that's it. Quick recap for today. Make sure that you have a written communication plan. Learn what kind of messaging app and or text tree that you would like to use to get in touch with all of your friends. Practice with those so everybody knows how to use them. Consider a walkie-talkie for your local area and or just family communication if you're traveling. If you're feeling super motivated, get ham certified so that you can use those ham radios. And then 5, consider satellite communication if you are really trying to be prepared for any scenario and you absolutely want to make sure that calls go through, then satellite communication may be your best option. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please hit like. Don't forget to hit subscribe. I am so glad you're here. And until next time, let's be prepared, not scared.